India or Ireland?
Neither. I'm in the United States, in the East Coast of the United States.
Oh, for some reason, sorry, I thought you were from Ireland.
The other, somebody, either Stuart or the other person will be from Ireland.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
It's a compliment.
I'm here in San Francisco, so it's a little bit early.
Oh yes, it is indeed early for you.
I'm based in Pune, recently relocated from Mumbai, and I did interact, with I'm forgetting the name of the person from Indiaspora about 8 or 9 months back when we were looking at some bit of volunteering between the Indiaspora and India. So we were looking at virtual or significant ways of doing it, and I'm forgetting the name of the person that we had interacted with. We had
I believe it's Sanjeev. Yes,
with Sanjeev. So me and my colleague Athir interacted deeply, and so I knew about you, though we didn't get to directly interact.
Awesome.
Great.
And I'm hoping that we others join in as well. 7:45 is the time given.
Do either of you have I have a small deck. I mean, I don't know if either of you have that or if that's okay. I know we only have 5 minutes, which I can breeze through in 5 minutes, but
yeah, I don't have it either, so more of a free flow. I was a part of another panel today afternoon by India time. Again, there were about 4 or 5 speakers, and there was no deck shared by anyone. But I think if you manage in 5 minutes, then I don't think it should be an issue.
Yeah, well, I'm happy either way. It doesn't really, we only have 5 minutes, so I'm perfectly happy either way.
So as I do understand it, so there is streaming of this on YouTube. They had given the link, and I did see a few people who commented on my this thing earlier in the day.
I see Rajan is joining, so I was just texting him.
Okay.
Hey, hi, Amar. Hi.
Hey, Rajan, good evening. How are you? I was just texting you.
Cool.
Hi, Rajan.
Hi. Hey, Shadab. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Hi. Good. I think they will let us know when to go live, right? Amar, early morning for you, huh?
Yeah, it's 6:15 in the morning. Yeah, I had to get up really early. Yeah. We also have Nicole Rajan from the East Coast. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Nico. Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Rajan, I was saying that I have a very short deck. I don't know if it's okay to use or if you'd prefer that we don't use it, but happy to do so. I'm happy to do either way.
Either way is okay. I mean,
okay.
I'm okay if you use it, but I think if we want to keep it more discussion, if you want to just use it to make a few points, that's fine. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, sounds good.
I think we are waiting for Vicky. We still have Vicky O'Connell to join. And Vaishali, let us know when you want us to go live. Yeah.
Hi Rajan, this is Digvijay Singh. We are live.
You're live already. Okay. So should we start?
Yeah, you can start.
Are we expecting Vicky O'Connell?
Yes, we are. I'll just follow up with my team once again.
Okay. I think we can start. Okay, so a very good evening to everyone joining us from India. And as you probably overheard us as we were getting started, that we have guests who have joined us from the US. It's early in the morning there. A very warm welcome to you, MR, the founder and chairman of Indiaspora. We're waiting for Vicky O'Connell to join us, but I also like to welcome Shalabh Sahai, who is the founder of I Volunteer, and Nicole Cirillo, the executive director at IF. And thank you for joining us here this evening. This is the concluding session of the volunteering summit, something that we have been pursuing as India at 75 for 9 years. This is our 9th year as we have been building out an activity that we believe is truly going to play a deep and meaningful role in the transformation of India, an activity that has been set up by the India at 75 Foundation and has had a very, very strong focus on bringing multiple stakeholders to come together to not only vision what India could be in its 75th year, but also to be able to see how we can contribute both through our time and skills in being able to make a significant change in many, many aspects of this country. And I must say that as we celebrate the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, a clarion call given by our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the initiatives like pro bono volunteering, the digital volunteer dashboard, the functional literacy program, the diaspora engagement with India, stand out as some of the very strong activities that have been happening through all of these 9 years, but things that we believe will only get strengthened as we move forward. 2014, January was really the time when we had set up the foundation. And, the whole idea was to see how we can, facilitate, synergize, create an alignment, augment government initiatives, create a very impactful journey around various initiatives at grassroots and bring different stakeholders together to make this happen. The government's MyGov program was one place where the India at 75 council group, individual companies contributed significantly to not only helping vision how that participative governance can actually hold fruit in India, but also bring all the other kind of activities and learnings that had happened since 2008 when the India at 60 discussions were in place and the vision for India at 75 was set up. So as we move closer, to Independence Day in 2022, we're really excited to see how we can get not only thousands and hundreds of thousands, but hopefully millions to join the volunteering movement. There is a joint effort from the Government of India. We've been working closely with the Ministry of Culture and the Honorable Joint Secretary and the Secretary of Culture, who have been mandated to work both with India at 75 and with so many other stakeholders in the country to bring together different sets of stakeholders and people to mobilize a movement that will not only celebrate what we have done in 75 years since our independence, but also envision an India at 2047, a vision of what India can be at 100 as we set forth for the next 25 years, an India that really will represent or provide leadership to the world. And the message of Vasudevay Kutumbakam, which is also the subject of our session today, really, how do we really see the earth as one family unlock? Because these are core principles, core philosophies that have existed in Indian civilization since ancient times. The philosophy, I think, of Vasudevay Kutumbakam can also help us achieve sustainable development goals. It can prevent biodiversity. It works towards mitigating climate change. It finds greater resonance amongst nations and people from all around the world. And I think the idea is to see how some of the activities, some of the aspects of this entire philosophy or thought process can provide solution-oriented kind of programs that can connect the world differently. I think today what we are trying to see is how do we look at international best practices that will enhance this Indian philosophy of Vasudevay Kutumbakam. And the idea is to see, can we really get a global consortium, that can come together, that can bring volunteers from the private sector, civil society, academia, global researchers, citizens, to form a critical mass to mitigate any future challenges, provide solutions, and build an action-oriented program that will address many of the issues, that are creating today conflict around the world, and also natural, issues and challenges that we have been facing. So the pandemic has really made it such a important, point in the history of the world, when we realize that, the whole world is connected, and nothing could have taught us this lesson better or stronger than this. And therefore the need for everyone to come up and step up. So I think it's a very interesting subject, and we're really joined by an exceptional panel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to request each of them to take about 5 minutes to share their thoughts, look at what are some of the international best practices that can really make the world really look together as one, and how do we really put that into practice through volunteering, pro bono, giving of time, skills, money. What does it take? How do we really structure it, and see where we can go from here? So I'm going to first request M.R. Rangaswamy, who, as I mentioned, is the founder and the chairman of Indiaspora. I must say it's a phenomenal group of people from America committed to the cause. I'm also on the board of Indiaspora right from the initial days, and I've seen MR, put sweat and blood into an activity that has now looked at, really taking great shape. He has also founded the Sandhill Group, which is one of the earliest angel investment firms, and was profiled on the front page of the Wall Street Journal at that time. He's been a part of the Forbes Midas list of investors, but someone who strongly believes in the ability for philanthropy, for corporate strategy, for experts, for entrepreneurship, to all come together. The Silicon Valley learnings, how can we really look at all of that, playing out in India, particularly, in the volunteering space. So thanks, MR, for being here with us, and would love to hear some of your thoughts on the subject.
Great. Thank you so much, Rajan, and thank you for having me to this wonderful session. As you know, this is also going to be a momentous year for Indiaspora, as we all kind of celebrate our 10th year later this year as well. So thank you for being part of our journey. And in terms of this space, I want to take a minute to step back and discuss a survey. Again, Indiaspora, as you know, is a global organization of diaspora who want to be a force for good. So one of the early things we did at Indiaspora was to take a survey of Indian Americans to see how they give and where they give. Very interesting survey. It was not just about time, but of money and other ways the diaspora is contributing. One thing that stood out in this survey that I have to point out, and I think this is our cultural and values that we've brought from India itself, is that we give twice as much time to volunteer in the United States than the average American. That was a very nice fact that came out of the survey. We really tend to give our time a lot more than the average person here. And I think that comes from our culture of and of the ethos of service and seva that we've brought from India, now trying to inculcate that into the next generation of youth here as well in the US. So that's one learning. The other thing you can learn from here is in schools here in the United States, for example, the schools that my kids went to, the concept of volunteerism was part of the educational system. They would either help underprivileged kids in other schools, they would go to soup kitchens, slice and dice vegetables or feed the poor. These are all parts of the school system growing up. Also, the college system here, when you write an essay for college, they're looking for well-rounded children. And so one of the elements that college admissions people look for is also what have they done outside of school? What are the types of ways they're volunteering, they're giving back? And so all this has become kind of the mainstream part of American society, if you will. And that is why, United States as a whole gives over $400 billion to, as contributions to nonprofits every year. A very large sum of money. And the Indians, we're trying to do our fair share of that larger pool of money. But I think on the time side, we've got people beat in this regard. A couple of other things I want to bring to your attention, everyone, is in the corporate side, when young people join organizations, several things we notice in the Indian diaspora here. One is more and more of the college graduates of Indian origin are shying away from going to work for investment banks and companies like that, where the whole money game is being played, to one where they're trying to get jobs in public service. So it's a kind of volunteerism if you look at that, right? Because you're going to make maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the money you would make at a large corporate organization if you go do public service. And so Indian Americans have stepped up. And in fact, if you look at the latest Biden administration, there are over 80 people of Indian origin in the Biden administration. And as you know, the government doesn't really pay that well. And so these people are getting below, average wages to actually contribute in that way. The other thing that's happening with young people here is there's a movement afoot amongst corporations called the 1% solution. And that is when you start a tech company, especially here in San Francisco in the Bay Area where I live, you give 1% of your shares of the company to a nonprofit. You give 1% of the profits of the company to nonprofits and charities, and you give 1% of employees' time. So everybody who works in a 1% company here in Silicon Valley, for example, that is 2 weeks a year, you get to work for a nonprofit of your choice. So again, young people are being attracted to companies that have the 1% solution because they get 2 full weeks to go work on any project of their choice that they want to work on. So again, these are some of the ideas we've picked up, as a diaspora. Giving is part of our ethos. So giving when you're young in school, giving in college, and also giving when you get your first job is part of all the processes that we have undertaken here to really get young people involved. And it's gratifying, like I said, to see the community as a whole, give twice the average in terms of our time. So I'll stop with that, Rajan, and I'll kind of wait for the Q&A session to participate some more. Thank you.
Thanks, MR, for sharing, those insights. And, the 1% solution that you talked of, I think that's a great international example. That's something that India can take on. In the early days of India at 75, we had looked at through Taproot Foundation and a few other US nonprofits, how do you really value, pro bono and skill volunteering? And, the Tata Group through Mukund Rajan chaired a committee for over a year. We took the effort to see what is the cost, that the corporate incurs, when you are giving or sharing a particular resource, with the nonprofit. But more than that, what's the value that the nonprofit, perceives that to be? And we came up with a formula that has gone into the government's 2% CSR policy. And, for skill volunteering, you can use that, as a formula. So I think some of these kind of initiatives, can bring about massive change if they have, been put out. And I really like this 1%, solution. And people like Shalabh and others who work with many other corporates here in India, see how that can go in. And I'm sure, we'll see how India at 75 can take that, further. So thanks for sharing that, MR. I'm now going to turn to Vicky O'Connell. She's the Learning and Capacity Building Officer for Volunteer Ireland. Vicky has joined Volunteer Ireland in July 2021, this just about 6 months ago. But her role is really to enable volunteering, involving organizations to develop capacity to support their volunteers. She's had a professional background, in not-for-profit organizations pretty much throughout her career. So thanks, Vicky, for being here with us, and really look forward to you sharing some of your thoughts around the best practices that you have seen, emerging around the world on this subject.
Yeah, thanks, Rajan, and thanks for inviting Volunteer Ireland here today. Yeah, So yeah, well, as Rajan said, I've been with Volunteer Ireland since July, but I have a history with volunteer development. I'm also a volunteer myself on a support line with a chess team, and also my current passion, cleaning plastic off our beaches. So Volunteer Ireland, I suppose, we're the lead agency for volunteering in Ireland. We're also a support body for volunteer centres around Ireland. And our volunteer centres sort of support organisations and people who wish to volunteer. So it's a bit like a matching service. We also promote and celebrate volunteering with National Volunteer Awards and provide services to community voluntary corporates up and down the country, as well as participating in Erasmus European projects to further the benefits of volunteering. And that would be at a European level. So you can see that volunteering in Ireland has quite a healthy infrastructure, particularly with the volunteer centres around the country, as well as ourselves. We also have a national volunteer strategy, and this came into force just as COVID sort of took off. And so we were able to adapt it to that situation, and this allowed us to develop a national programme called Community Volunteers, which supports local needs in our communities. So people who become community volunteers have the opportunity to support local events and festivals, but along with that, the more urgent one-off needs like the community response to COVID-19. I was just looking at your philosophy, you know, the world is one family. I'm not going to try and pronounce the Sanskrit, but I love this concept, and volunteering fits this philosophy very closely, as volunteering is really a world family to me. In Ireland, I suppose 34% of our population volunteer, and our definition of volunteering, as outlined in our strategy, is that volunteering is any time willingly given, either formally or informally, for the common good and without financial gain. So, as I'm sure you all know, formal volunteering is that which takes place within organisations, whilst informal volunteering is that which takes place outside the organisations. And informal volunteering is also that person, that individual who does not consider what they're doing as volunteering, but just sees themselves as lending a hand or being neighbourly. The pandemic changed our world, and in respects it brought us closer together, I suppose, to the philosophy of one world as a family. And like 2 years ago, you wouldn't have had an Englishwoman who's living in Ireland at a conference in India. So COVID shone a spotlight on volunteering in Ireland, and we're finding that all organisations around the world are experiencing the same challenges, because, you know, the pandemic changed volunteering as well as the nature and support that organisations and volunteers require. And there has been a shift from that formal volunteering to informal volunteering in Ireland. Partly this is due to the fact that people don't want to, or feel that they're unable to commit for long periods of time in the uncertain world that we live in. But also in March 2020 in Ireland, there was a massive influx of people hoping to volunteer. And the formal organisations, which used to be sort of the bread and butter, just didn't have the capacity to involve all the people that wanted to volunteer. So people wanted to volunteer now and not have to go through bureaucracy required by these organisations. They just wanted to help. They wanted to help now. So we need to continue to harness the goodwill and increased volunteering resulting from the pandemic. And one way that we feel this can be done is by changing to reflect the changing desires and motivations of volunteers, and move towards trends such as the virtual, micro, episodic and spontaneous volunteering. These changes were occurring before the pandemic, but have been speeded up now just because society has changed. And people have been reflecting around this for a long time. And, you know, now we feel in Ireland it's time to change. So there has been a rise in many new online volunteer roles, as well as a cohort of new, younger, more digitally literate people keen to explore these types of online volunteer roles and activities. So this type of volunteer, they are used to the less bureaucratic, the informal volunteering, and that can be supported well digitally. Of course, though, it's important to recognise that the personal contact within volunteering can never be fully replaced, as there have been numerous studies that demonstrate the health benefits of volunteering. And in the main, they would be due to the social aspect of volunteering, that contact with other people. So whilst digitalisation can assist volunteer managers in many ways, you know, the human factor must always remain. I just finish on this. I suppose fundamentally COVID-19 changed the way that we connect with others, that we physically connect as well. And this changes the way that people volunteer. But, you know, what we want to remember is that what hasn't changed is the power and abundance of volunteers, and huge numbers of people came forward, which is amazing, you know. And volunteering is an astonishing tool that brings people together in a common cause, you know, and it does help people and communities and brings us comfort, connection and hope. And I'll just leave it on that positive note there.
Thanks, Vicky. You know, I as you rightly said, I think the pandemic has, you know, really got everyone to step up, and there couldn't probably be a more opportune moment or opportune time for us to be discussing this topic of, you know, Vasudevay Kutumbakam, which, you know, is really something that has already made its way through the United Nations General Assembly rostrum, you know, at the World Economic Forum. When Prime Minister Modi spoke, it was presented as a methodology that will closely align the world together, you know, as one that can come together in terms of a crisis. And I think, you know, it's probably a concept or a philosophy whose time has come, you know, because every country is facing a similar emotion. It's just about how do you really embody it, or how do you really talk about it. So very interesting thoughts, and we really see how this world can really shape up and come together as we move forward. I'm going to now invite Shalabh Sahai. He's a co-founder of I Volunteer, India's first enterprise dedicated to volunteer service, and the convener of the I Volunteer Awards that recognizes, celebrates, and inspires leaders in volunteering. He's also the co-founder of Jobs for Good. You know, the name says it all. How do you bring, you know, people together? He's does a lot of great things. He's on the Global Council for the Global Pro Bono Network, but most importantly, he's a very key member of the CII's Council on India at 75, and has really been a part of this volunteering journey from day one. So thanks, Shalabh, for being here, and would love to hear some of your thoughts on, you know, how do we really build upon this philosophy of the world coming together as one.
Thank you, Rajan. Thanks for the opportunity, and happy to be, you know, in the company of this people from around the globe. I do want to go back to kind of, you know, some of the references that were made earlier, like, I think MR mentioned that about giving and volunteering both as significantly increasing. And I do want to bring about a certain distinction between, you know, giving and volunteering. So giving usually what we have seen or we have read is mostly still connected to community. So people tend to kind of, you know, give back more to the community from where they come, other than the community that they are also belonging, especially if it is long distance. But when it comes to volunteering, we haven't actually seen any such distinction. You see a person in need and you want to kind of, you know, give right away. So I think the personal connectedness that it brings, the cross-community connectedness that it brings, I think it is much more powerful in its nature than possibly, you know, just giving. So that's something that kind of, you know, I've always felt the power of volunteering is to be much more, you know, pervasive. The other thing is, you know, we just spoke about, you know, again, Emma mentioned about the 1% thing, and we know about the 2% CSR rule, which is in India. You know, all companies over a certain profit and to a certain turnover are required to deploy 2% of their profit as part of CSR grants and funding. Now, interestingly, volunteering is not a part of that 2% spend, which, you know, Rajan understands, and we have been kind of, you know, lobbying and trying to figure how to make it work. But in the absence of the same, still, you know, the companies, we've seen the employee volunteering and engagement growing across the board. And so that also shows the power of, you know, volunteering when it comes to how corporates kind of, you know, see it, you know, irrespective of the support or the structure that is available from the government or not. I do want to go back to kind of, you know, how we have, as I volunteer, seen volunteering across the globe and brought some of the best practices to India, and kind of, you know, vice versa. So one of the examples is this, the practice of board trusteeship, which is pretty prevalent in most of the developed countries, you know, Western Europe and North America. We tried kind of, you know, doing similar in India, and what we evolved now is something called as a whiteboard, which is being seen as a leadership development opportunity for corporates when they're looking at developing their own internal bench of leaders. We have companies like Bosch, Titan Titan is an Indian, large Indian conglomerate, but Bosch, Titan, and Siemens kind of working with us on something like this, deploying a set of their, people who've been leaders who've been identified for the next leadership role to gain both a board experience while also servicing the community. Now, interestingly, the same model of ours has actually also been implemented somewhere in Chile. And we are under talks with one or two other similar organizations in Singapore and another one elsewhere on trying to replicate similar model in other locations. So we've learned something from what's happening elsewhere. We have applied it to what works to our socioeconomic and work practices, and kind of re-exporting it back to some of the similar developing countries elsewhere. So I think that's a very good example of how these things work together. But interestingly, the whiteboard program, which pre-pandemic for us was a location-specific program. We had a whiteboard, a panel of advisors working in Bangalore, advising nonprofits in Bangalore, and another similar set in Mumbai, advising nonprofits in Mumbai. During the pandemic, we made it kind of pan-India. And when we're talking of Vasudevay, Kutumbakam, the world as a single family, there's no reason why for example, this broad set of people, when we're talking about volunteering practices across the globe, why can't we actually bring this at a micro level and start working with a nonprofit anywhere? So we can have whiteboard members from anywhere advising a nonprofit from anywhere. That's now possible. So I think that's an example. I want to take kind of a couple of other examples. Again, the practice of university graduates being given certain credits for volunteering or community service. Now, that's something as a practice which is picking up in India, though not structurally, but socially it has picked up quite a bit. So earlier it was only that there were Indian students who were targeting to study in the US or Europe who were doing community service to get a good statement of purpose. But now we have the leading B schools in the country in India actually encouraging, and not just encouraging, even mandating that, as part of their learning and development, the students have to undertake some of these courses. So that's again a practice which we have picked up from, from some other place, adopted it, and we're ready to kind of share an experience of how is it going with us and make it grow. The same with kind of, I was talking this morning, the average age of volunteers in India is kind of, getting younger and younger and younger. And we are, during the pandemic specifically, as I volunteer early, we used to work only with 16 plus volunteers. During the pandemic, we started working with people as young as 8 years old. So 8 to 16, how do we introduce them very early on to the idea of community service? And when we're doing this, we have to think of it, we have to broaden our own horizon. We can't purely think of how the community directly benefits, but also how the volunteer benefits. How do you seed a culture of volunteering? And I think these are things that we kind of, can cross-learn as well. Also, in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of activism from the government putting together platforms and initiatives which are completely volunteer-driven or focused on volunteering, which was not there, let's say a decade back. There's a lot of work still, I think. There's a lot of collaboration with existing volunteering structures in the country that is possible. But we see that this is something that is picked up, something that I always felt that, was much more prominent in North America, but not as much over here. But I think that's kind of, picking up as well. And yeah, and so I think, we can go on and on, but I'll come back to kind of, when we are part of that discussion. But yeah, so this is to summarize. I think, we are learning from what is happening across the globe. We're adopting it in our own way, and we are ready to share our own learning. So that's what has already been. But during these 1.5 years, what we realize is that we need not just share and learn. We can actually even work together, across borders. So yeah, pretty much in line with what we're discussing today. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalabh. You're right. Volunteering provides a collaboration tool that very few other things can provide, especially when we look at the world working together. But, it's interesting that the youth power of the world really sits in India, right? We have 1 in 10 people in the world who is an Indian under the age of 25. Now, how can we harness that youthful energy? And you said going down to the age of 8. And the earlier we start, I think it can really be a very large force, for good. So I think we need to look at best practices. We need to look at what are the strengths in India. We need to see how we can use technology a lot more. So many aspects of volunteering that, are opportunities only for us waiting to be unlocked together. So thanks for sharing, those thoughts. I'm now going to move to Nicole Cirillo. She's the Executive Director of the International Association for Volunteer Effort. She has significant executive experience across environmental and social justice sectors and has led the engagement of a large network of global volunteers. She's also been the international director at Earthwatch, where she led the implementation of citizen science volunteering programs. So a lot of experience and richness, there on volunteering. So Nico, over to you to share some of your best practices or what you think we can, build or bring together as we work in a collaborative manner for the future.
Rajan, thank you for having me. Congratulations on your 75th. And congratulations to the work that it's taken, and best of luck for your 100th anniversary over the next 25 years. So I am delighted to be here. I'm the executive director of the International Association for Volunteer Effort. And basically what we do is we work with leaders of volunteering in the public sector, in the private sector, and in the NGO sector to create a more just and sustainable world. And I love going this far into the session because I can basically just corroborate all of the wonderful points that my fellow panelists have made. IAVE works very carefully with both corporations and with leaders like Shalab and Vicky, people who are looking after volunteering and building really catalytic volunteering in their country. And I just want to share just a few slides because we've done some research over this past year to look at how these leadership organizations are behaving during COVID. What happened to them? What were some of the challenges? And I'm going to go through them quickly. And of course, Rajan, we can make this and the research available at iave.org. That's IAVE.org. But what we really found is that these organizations were able to thrive and survive because they were at heart transformative leaders. COVID-19 had dual impact. Yes, it brought us all together in some pretty fundamental ways, but it also pushed us apart. We were isolated, socially distant, and many of us were prevented from seeing friends, neighbors, colleagues at work, and people around us. So it had that very dual aspect, which is very, very important when you think about these leadership organizations. Just very quickly, one of the things we found were that these organizations, again, people like Shalab and Vicky working to really build volunteering, what they reported to us about the experience of managing volunteering during COVID was that we needed to shift towards what we call values-driven advocacy. So it was no longer just okay to sort of overlook some of the inequity and some of the inequality that was existent in our world, and to really understand that this notion of volunteering is in fact means to an end. We volunteer because we want to see social change and we want to see things happen. And this notion that there are themes of trust and reciprocity right at the heart of volunteering. We also really uncovered from these organizations a culture of collaboration. And this is where we really did come together. These organizations across the globe, and again, we surveyed over 75 of them, really reached out to their governments and to the private sector in ways that they hadn't before. Because as we all know, business as usual was no longer possible during COVID-19. So these organizations simply had to reach out to change policy within government, but to bring in new partnerships with corporations. And again, that second bullet, educating decision makers about how important volunteering is, something that I think we all can agree on. Volunteering is often overlooked and not appreciated for the imperative that it is. So the need to really educate on both the value of volunteering, but the role of volunteering in civil society. And really supporting and developing one another, really understanding that at this time of crisis, volunteers needed to be protected. They needed standards. They needed safeguarding. They needed things that they didn't really necessarily well, they needed, but they needed to a much greater degree. These volunteer organizations really led the charge in making sure that those standards globally were held up and adhered to. And something Vicki mentioned, in noticing this empowerment of these community volunteers, the friends, the neighbors that wouldn't perhaps consider themselves as formal volunteers, but were very much part of the system. These organizations reached out to those informal volunteers and really enveloped them and learned how to work with them to create a more cohesive representation of volunteering. And finally, innovation. Think of ourselves in that word pivot that we all learn to use. These leadership organizations for volunteering really pivoted in this moment. And one of the biggest ways they did that is through the creation of virtual volunteering systems and shifting all those things online that had been done in person. There are pluses and minuses, I think, as Vicki mentioned, but the notion of really driving that innovation. And also the notion of enveloping young people. Many of traditional volunteers are retirees or people out of the workforce who, because of safeguarding reasons for this virus, were prevented from volunteering. But the pivot towards really enveloping young people as volunteers and inculcating them into this culture of service was an important innovation among this group. And finally, thinking about what the future holds, the showcasing of the importance of volunteer involvement. Every one of us has said this. It's not regarded as the imperative that it is. How do we work with governments and the private sector to really change that? Reflecting the diversity that's really within social inclusion. Noticing that the people in our community who may not traditionally have been engaged and making sure we're making a space for them as volunteers. And really this notion of dealing with uncertainty and adapting to new realities. I don't think there's a single person that thinks that we're going to go back to the way we were. So how do we bring what we've learned into the next future forward of volunteering? Again, linking those networks and how very important that is, both for learning and sharing, but linking with one another, corporates, governments, or other people, other civil society organizations around the world. And finally, being prepared for the next crisis. COVID-19 has taught us that volunteering plays an essential role. How do we organize now for what we know will come in the future, the next uncertainty and the next crisis? So just to end on this quote, most of these leaders really are people who are really thinking they can change the world. And in fact, those are the people who are crazy enough to believe they can, who in fact will. Thank you, Rajan.
Thanks, Nico, for those very interesting comments and presentation. And, you know, here are 5 people, right, who are crazy enough wanting to go and do it. I think we are all aligned on that subject, coming from different parts of the world. You know, in the morning when we had the first session, you know, we just said that volunteering just makes you a much better person, you know, and the easiest thing you can do is just smile. So someone said, you know, just if you, wherever you go, just smile, and that's a great volunteering effort. So, you know, we always think of when will I volunteer? How will I volunteer? I think there are so many aspects to this, you know, that can just bring about a big change. But, you know, I'm going to we have some time for a few questions, and really would like to, you know, kind of get into more around the core of really what could be some good practices. But, you know, MR, coming to you, you come from, you know, the place where technology begins and literally, you know, ends, and everyone, you know, talks about the valley as the place. But how do you see really technology playing a much larger role in you know, creating innovative volunteering, you know, options? Or where do you see technology coming into volunteering, and what can we do together to enhance that?
Rajan, I think, you know, being from San Francisco and Silicon Valley, you see everyday startups coming up all over the place. And I think today we can use some of the technology for good. Social media can be used for good. New applications that kind of define volunteerism or show volunteerism can be really good. Also, a lot of young people now want instant gratification. So can they earn badges or merits or rewards for doing things, and can this be then put into social media to showcase these people. I mean, there's so many ways we can use technology today. And now, of course, the metaverse is coming upon us, Web 3.0. So how can we use some of things like NFTs, non-fungible tokens, to be a force for good and reflect volunteerism? Many, myriad of ways that we can use technology. And I think maybe one of the things that you can do in the auspices of India at 75 is to maybe have a group that just looks at harnessing technology or enabling all kinds of new technology that's upon us today. So I see these startups come up, but someone needs to kind of leverage and be a catalyst, just like Indiaspora is a catalyst. Technology can be a catalyst for the volunteer community. Also want to take a minute to kind of talk about two other things quickly. One is, the United States government over time has implemented two great programs for volunteerism. One is, of course, the Peace Corps, where Americans go overseas in large numbers to help countries, and AmeriCorps, where Americans stay in the United States to help communities across the US. So those are a couple of programs that could be looked at by government. And the other thing is modeling NGOs to reflect some NGO best in the US. For example, Teach for America is now Teach for India and so forth. So are there many other organizations like that that can be put into India with different value systems and different practices? So I just want to leave you with that as well.
Thanks, MR. I think makes so much sense on what all we can do. So as India at 75, we do have a national volunteering grid which Infosys built out that connects corporates to opportunities. But we keep looking at what technology. So maybe using AI to get better opportunities or opportunities that are aligned more with the interests of people in cities that they travel to. So we're looking at how you can bring blockchain to validate certain volunteering activities, so one can give recognition, maybe even look at tax breaks. So there are a lot of things I think we can look at within the India at 75 context, but would love to catch up further with you on some of these subjects, because I think this is an opportunity for us to really see how we can bring all of this together, especially when we are looking ahead, right? We're looking for the next 25 years. And Vicky, I have a question to you really on that forward-looking thing. We talked of MR mentioned, and somebody else also mentioned, you need community service to get into some of the best schools and colleges. People kind of learn that later, in life, or knowing that it's important to do. But, when we are building capacity in people, how can the education systems really support, volunteering at an early age? What can really trigger that to happen at scale? Is there something that can be done there? Some thoughts that you might have on that?
Just at an early age in the education system, there isn't actually anything formal in the education system in Ireland at the moment for volunteering. We have in secondary school, there's a year called transition year where students are around 15, 16, and a portion of that would be volunteering. But as such, it's not embedded in the education system at all. And this is something that within the strategy, we're hoping that we're going to be able to make a difference. And, through advertising, through getting on board with the Department of Education and making, having, as Nicole was saying there, about the young people volunteering at a very young age. As I mentioned, I do the beach cleaning. That would be around family volunteering. We're actually doing a European project around family volunteering at the moment, creating documents to support organisations that would like to start a family volunteering programme, because there's nothing actually formalised out there. And embracing the people at a young age, and as we've talked about the benefits of volunteering, and just ensuring that they get that positive volunteer experience the first time they volunteer, when they're 8 years old or when they're 10 years old, so that that they have that sort of idea of what volunteering is all about, and they get the glow from it and everything else. But yeah, as with regards to education, as I say, at the moment over here, it's not formal at all, but I do believe that it should be in the curriculum in all schools as well. So I'll just leave that.
Yeah, no, I think this is again an area we can, probably look at, because around the world, if we look at the education systems, I think, the getting volunteering as a concept early, in the early learning ages, probably is a gap. I think this has been pointed out, and maybe there is something for us to, work towards as we move forward. But Nico, how is the business leadership really viewing this, right? You talked about a lot of things that are happening, and when you interact with business leadership, how do you see them responding to volunteering? Do you see that growing because you've had a rich experience in this space? How has it evolved over the last few decades, maybe, and where do you see it going over the next 2 decades?
It's an excellent question, and I think we have seen it grow tremendously. And I think it's about this notion of values, and I think it's about this notion of moving beyond a tick box exercise of CSR and really engaging your employees and the full spectrum of your employees in giving back. People like to say that, certain generations like to work for values-based companies, but I don't know a single person who doesn't want to come home happy and proud of where they've been all day. And this notion of demonstrating your values as a company and really demonstrating that you're living up to your social contract is an extremely important thing today. I live in the United States, and it's getting more and more difficult for companies not to have a social voice. We've seen that over the past year, that we're expecting as consumers that the companies from which we purchase are actually have that social conscious and have the social values that we have. And volunteering is an excellent way to really both promote that amongst your most important audience, and that's your employees. As Vicky said, one of the things we're really seeing is people wanting to take their families, employees, not only employee volunteering, moving out into being into the community and where you're able to really bring your families. That also really helps to inculcate young people into this culture of service. But also this notion that volunteering needs to be expanded in how we define it. It is our time. It is giving our time, it is giving our talent, but it's increasingly this act of giving our voice to the things we see around us that we want to change. And I think corporations are really understanding that and are really allowing for that definition of volunteering that includes time, but also talent, right? You're giving your skills. It's not just your hour that you have on a Saturday, but you're actually giving your technology skills or your empathy skills. And then this notion of giving your voice, using your time to give your voice to the challenges that you see around you.
Yeah, I think, there's really strong movement. I think what you mentioned, you have seen, but even through the 15 years of the India at 75 experience, we've seen companies which really did not have a large focus. And, the Tata Group is a very large group in India with over 800,000 employees. And, they started out with, we started with the National Volunteering Week. One company or one group started one volunteering week, in March around the week of the founder. We saw them then add a second week in the year somewhere in September. And then last year, they've added a third week in December, so it's very clearly indicative of the kind of importance that we see is being given to such things. But really, we got to be able to see how that can, happen more at scale. And I don't know what it takes. Shalabh, you give awards. Is it recognition? Because you are one of the guys who have seen how people respond when they're recognized, for volunteering. How important do you think is a recognition to a volunteer or to a group of volunteers, and how do we really, make that much larger, right? It needs to become like a Nobel Prize. I mean, probably, and how do we really do that? I mean, just wanted to understand some thoughts from you on that.
Recognition is, I think, extremely important, and I will come back to what forms recognition. But I do want to kind of, when you mentioned about we should Nobel for volunteering, something that I have been discussing with some of the key players, like including IAWay or possibly Points of Light, and some I was recently a part of a Russian award called We Are Together. How can we actually, most of the countries and cultures will have, or companies will have, some of their internal or national or state-based awards that recognize volunteers and leaders who support volunteering. we need to have a global stage, a global forum, and not one, possibly more, that can actually bring all of these national ones or regional ones together on a single platform. And I think that itself will be a big thing. I think that's a role that some of the global associations or possibly a UN body some can play. And organizations like I Volunteer will be very happy to support. I'm sure CII India at 75 will be very happy to kind of play a role over there. But I also want to go a little deeper into recognition. Recognition doesn't, to a volunteer or to a company or to a non-profit, being recognized on a stage is definitely a big thing. But recognition goes much more deeper in several ways. Being recognized by your family, by your community, by your co-employees and peers doesn't have to happen on the stage, but it hits home much harder and stays with you much longer. It is not necessarily social media's kind of worthy of posting a picture of, but it's something that kind of stays closer with your heart, and that is something that we have learned much more. The second element of this is that it has to be, recognition has to be much more honest and direct. It shouldn't be, sometimes recognitions are kind of shown to be much bigger than the real contribution, and I really believe that those things are definitely to stay. So I think that's something that the other element is we've volunteer dropout is something which is often taken up as a big challenge. But if we recognize also the motivations of the volunteer and how will they feel kind of will recognize and are able to service that and come up to that level, then automatically we're able to arrest the volunteer dropouts as well. So it kind of not just talks more about recognizing, but also about retaining volunteers and spurring more people to go out and volunteer. So I think it's very core to every aspect of volunteering.
I think you raised a great point on the heart, right? Because it's something that stays close to the heart. And, volunteering, I think, is also, one thing that aligns the 3 H's, right? The head, the heart, and the hand. Many a times we think of wanting to do something, but till you don't really go and do it, the hand and head are not aligned. And if it's done with the heart, obviously, it just enhances that experience. So, thank you, everyone, for sharing. Yeah.
I just want to kind of on that bit share one little experience that I had. I run I Volunteer Awards, which you're aware, for last 10 years, and I've recognized several people, companies, NGOs, and all of it. For me, one of my favorite moments was about 3 years back. I was visiting the UNB office in Delhi, and one of the persons over there who had known me came and hugged me and said that you had recognized me at I Volunteer Awards as a youth champion in this particular year, and that changed life for me. I was treating volunteering only as a side thing now, and that's my kind of the main thing now. And so while that transformed him, for me that recognition that somebody came and hugged me was much bigger than what I do on the stage with I Volunteer Awards. So just a bit of a story.
Yeah, and I'm sure each one of you must be having such wonderful experiences, for what you do. And I think, where would the world be without so many of you who do so much to mobilize volunteering at scale? And I think if we really want to, make that happen as a Vasudevay Kutumbakam, as we shape and unite the world, I think we don't have much time, but I'm going to ask each one of you, to probably list out 3 vertical areas, because volunteering is such a broad subject. It's a horizontal, it can be done in so many different ways. But if we really wanted to see the world as one, where would we align volunteers to kind of actively participate in vertical areas? I don't know, maybe the top 3, that come to the minds of each one of you. And maybe Shalabh, will go back the other way. We'll start with you. What could be the 3 areas that you think we all need to kind of, the world needs to come together to align on if we really want to see Vasudevay Kutumbakam happen?
Yeah, I think the first that comes to mind obviously is collaborations. We've seen, the second is, I think, scale. And both of these come from the startup experience. When a lot of people who are into startup and young people are looking at volunteering also from a point of view of collaborations and scaling. And those are 2 things that definitely come to mind. The third is recognition. I just spoke about it. So we can do with a global level of recognition and better understanding of volunteering to promote.
Thanks. Nico?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to what I said. I'll just stick to one, and it's this notion of valuing volunteering for the contributions it provides. I just had some early conversations with some large sort of household name global health institutions about how we might involve volunteers. And, their response was, well, we've never really thought of that before. And they're all good people doing great work, but there's something very wrong in that picture, right? That you wouldn't think of volunteers as a mechanism to deploy public health. And I think if we could change that so that we see volunteers right along with the rest of those categories of society that we think are essential, I think that would really give recognition and value to volunteering and put it exactly where it needs to be.
Vicky?
I can't really follow what Nicole says there, I don't think, but yeah, I suppose for us, it would be around supporting volunteers, to do their role, and that has changed over the last couple of years as well. So just, it's a very individual thing. Different volunteers need different levels of support, and it's just recognizing that fact and allowing that, and the fact also that a volunteer's motivations may change. They may start in a particular role for a particular reason, but that motivation might change 6 months or a year down the line. So it's recognizing that as well, which would come under the support for them. And then, obviously from my position in Volunteer Ireland is all around capacity building for volunteer involving organisations. So for us, that's a big part of our strategy, is helping to build the capacity of the organisations that are involving the volunteers. So that would be another part for me. And then as just the same, valuing volunteers, and with our strategy, we're just very proud of our strategy, as you may gather. With our strategy, it's a sign that our government here in Ireland is valuing volunteers, and that's where that the value needs to come from as well. Is so that's me.
And Emma, final word for you.
Yeah, I just have 2 points, Rajan, and you're familiar with both. At Indiaspora, we did the Heritage India program, where we had a contest in the US to send a group of young people who had not visited India, of Indian origin, to come to India and witness India's history, culture, and service. And they also happened to go to Gandhi's ashram and so on and so forth, right? So the one way is that 32 million diaspora throughout the world, maybe about 5-6 million of them are young people. How do we harness that? So Heritage India is one such program. The second thing you and I have talked about in the past, and maybe it's time to kind of implement it this year, is a volunteer desk of some kind in India, where the diaspora can easily find opportunities to come to India to volunteer. And this could be a bridge between the diaspora and India in a very meaningful way.
And I think, that's exactly the point where I'm going to end this session on, MR, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think for India, there's an urgent need to create a structured volunteering ecosystem for the country. I think, it is high time that multiple stakeholders came together, really put this entire thing together. I think, the Bharat or the India symbolically having National Volunteering Day, National Volunteering Weeks, a central nodal agency that's really coordinating a lot of those efforts and making, this so real, not only for, diaspora from around the world to engage with India, but even for India to engage with everyone in the world, and different countries really to come together in different shapes and forms to make sure that we really realize the vision of the world is one. So again, thank you, each one of you. You've been a wonderful session, and coming at different odd hours. Again, really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And one thing I can say, we're going to really tap into each one of you for your ideas as we build on the vision for India at 100, and keep this philosophy at the core as we go about doing that. So thank you very much, and have a great day ahead or great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.